back to Exhibit Extras, where we give you some more in-depth looks at our exhibits. So we're back in our circus exhibit, and today we're going to talk about how the exhibit came together in terms of what was covered, what was left out, and how those choices were made. This exhibit is a curation, so everything's not there. And we mentioned this, I mention this a lot whenever I talk about exhibits. You kind of work with what you've got. And so this exhibit, as we mentioned in the first video we did for it, wound up being a panel exhibit, but that was not always necessarily going to be the case. So Megan did look for objects and artifacts, and so there were some things that were possibly going to be included. So we have a couple of items here that we wanted to show you that were considered for the exhibit, and talk about why they were considered and why ultimately they didn't make it, which I guess the short answer is there was not enough stuff to include a case to go along with it. So that's the short reason why this stuff wouldn't have fit anyway, but I'll give those to you and let you talk about them however.
So this is a photograph of one of the traveling circuses, I believe, probably turn of the century, coming through Johnson City, Tennessee. And it's taken downtown, so elephants walking down Main Street as spectators look on. And so this would have been included because it is a physical copy of a photograph that people can look at. It's related to a nearby area. It's a lot of these buildings are still standing, so it's a great referential point. So the idea could have been too to maybe do like a then and now kind of look at it for folks so that they could imagine it, especially when they re-encounter that space. So that was kind of the idea behind this particular piece.
Yeah, and it's a John Robinson Circus, so it ties into the pamphlet that we have from a circus in Johnson City. So it's always good when you're putting an exhibit together, especially if you have like a really neat artifact that's like a pamphlet or a paper, and then one that's a photograph, so you can take something that's written and combine it with something that's visual and sort of recreate an entire, or at least as much of an atmosphere as possible. So
yeah, it's a balancing act in a lot of ways. I mean, if you think about it
like
too,
a circus.
Exactly. If you do 33% 3D objects, 33% photos, 33% paper ephemera, you know, you have to engage people in different ways because people respond to different materials in different ways. You know, again, this is visual, but we did try to mix photos with artwork, with text, with primary sources. So we're trying that diversification, you know, in a 2D kind of way. And that's the other thing. You mentioned the John Robinson Circus. So there were lots of circuses that came through. Fortunately, we have a lot from John Robinson because they came here annually for a very, very long time, decades and decades. But the Sun Brothers Circus, the Ringling Brothers Circus, we've got the Clyde Beatty Circus. So many, and that was, you know, at the time too, and there was this big proliferation and explosion of circuses. They actually dubbed in this area the Circus Wars because so many circuses were coming through. So we did have to balance materials from different sources and try to have consistency, but also recognize that these are all different entities as well. So this artifact came to us kind of in an unorthodox manner. This was not in our collection and still technically isn't, but I'm going to turn it over to you to explain, Joe, because this is from...
Me. So one of the benefits of being a public historian is just kind of happening across things sometimes and knowing where it might be needed. So I was aware that Megan was working on a circus exhibit and was looking for artifacts, and I was helping somebody clean out a house and came across that and some of the stuff that they had in their papers, and it was not prevalent to us. We did not need it, and so I called Megan on her day off and said, "Hey, you know, history never rests. Would you like this circus artifact?" And so I described it. She said, "Sure," and then I left at the office. And so it's one of those examples. You know, it doesn't necessarily fit in with the time frame of the exhibit, but it could have been used as a talking off point, as a compare and contrast between time periods. So it could have had benefit. Plus, if you're looking for objects for an exhibit, and especially if you don't have that many objects on hand, if you have a cool object and you can find some way to tie it in, it's always useful. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is great because it's very tactile. You know, people respond to that kind of artifact. It's rare in that it paper ephemera regarding the circus. It is a little bit outside of the time frame of historical interpretation that's covered in the exhibit, but like Joe said, a lot of the acts and performances in here are consistent with both of these circuses, the Cole Brothers and the Clyde Beatty Circus. They were still doing aerial acts. They were still using elephants and horses like they had been. That isn't the case today. So yeah, no, it's a great material, and again, locally relevant. So
that's it. That's most of what we wanted to cover about things that were included and sort of how they got there. Briefly, do you want to talk about how long it took you to put this exhibit together?
Yeah, absolutely. Originally, I was hoping to accomplish this in 1 to 2 months. I like to do all of my archival research really thoroughly, and so, you know, even though a lot of stuff ends up getting trimmed out, it's just really important to make sure that you have a pretty well-researched and comprehensive, you know, starting point. So that 1 to 2 month period included a lot of original research, a lot of archival research, etc. It ended up taking me longer than that, probably about 4 to 5 months, just because we're a small organization. We have a limited staff and we have a lot of responsibilities and things going on. So I would have loved more time, like we all would, you know, to kind of eternally work on something and make it perfect. But I'm very, very happy with the result. I will say too, during the research phase, what was really interesting is that there is no book published on this yet. Yes. There is no website on this. So the most comprehensive history that we have of American circuses in Northeast Tennessee, from what I can tell, is actually in this exhibit. And so, you know, I definitely recommend to people in the future, don't be scared away from exhibit topics because there's nothing there. You know, you can create that content, you can fill that void, and it feels really good, you know, at the end of that to have contributed something back.
And it does. It looks amazing. If you haven't seen it, come check it out. It is on display through the end of the year, so through December. But also, when you come look at it and you see like 8 panels, also remember, like, just to create these 8 panels takes months. Research takes a lot of time, accruing items and curating them and putting them together and getting these pieces to fit together. It is a very time-consuming process, but that, again, with Exhibit Extras, we like to, you know, help people understand like what this process is like, and sometimes this process is very time-consuming, especially when you've got other things going on. Yeah. So, but that's it. Thank you to Megan. Thank you to the Circus exhibit. Feel free to come check it out. Follow along with us here on Exhibit Extras and keep an eye out for our next videos, which will be covering some of the other stuff that we have going on. As always, thank you for watching and joining.